really lovely. And I am honored, and I'd like to extend my thanks to the Allard Prize, to the board members, and especially the ones who came up and spoke so eloquently. And just the opportunity to pay homage to Abdellah Ahmed Moumin, the shedder of light, to Andrea Ngombele, willing to build better, and Virginia Lapara, the holder to account. And the fact that we have 3 empty chairs, if ever we needed a sign that the United States is no exception, we have it tonight. In fact, I would say the United States is today more than ever following the book, The Kleptocrat's Handbook. Every country that I would consider to be systemically corrupt has variations on the theme. And we see those variations in Guatemala, in Congo-Brazzaville, in Somalia, in the United States. They seem entirely different, and yet there are patterns. And I could go on all night about some of those patterns. I'll spare you. But one important one is very evident right here. How do kleptocratic networks fight back? They divide the people. They distract their attention away from corrupt networks ruling them towards identity markers, scapegoats, and trumped up security threats. That's a pattern I've seen everywhere. And we're seeing it today in the United States. But let's step back a moment, and let's consider the real enemy here. Not the enemies without, but the real enemy, which is systemic corruption. You know, often in law and in letters, and those are the domains of Virginia and Abdellah, they have to present a discrete story, like a corrupt incident, a scandal, with a beginning, a middle, and an end. That's just how those domains require corruption to be parsed out. But in fact, number one, there is no end, because corruption is really about the chase after money, which has become the leading measure of social standing. And as such, there's no such thing as enough, right? So it's a race with no finish line, and corruption doesn't have an end. And it's not a discrete event. It's in fact an operating system. It's the operating system of a network which crosses political parties, or sometimes there are rival networks from different political parties, but they agree on the basic rules of the game, right? Its members span public and private sectors. They even include out-and-out criminals. You know, and I would say the situation in Guatemala is a very clear example of this type of network corruption, where in Guatemala, the military and intelligence structures are really in the lead of the ruling network. It's a hydra. You know the hydra, the story from Greek mythology, where you cut a head off and 2 more heads grow back, right? Again, in Guatemala, the hydra of the corrupt networks reconfigured around the loss of the president. And even though with great difficulty a new president was elected, the network has reconfigured around him. And so even though there was, you know, a wonderful potential reformer was elected in a very contested election, Virginia can't be here because she might get extradited back to a country which would re-imprison her. Sometimes countries led by such corrupt networks can look individualized and authoritative, or authoritarian seeming, and I would say Congo-Brazzaville is one of those, and the direction the United States is moving looks a lot like that to me. Or it can be rather chaotic seeming, where you have competition among rival networks, as is the case in Somalia. All of them repurpose the instruments of state function. Number one, formal, all kleptocratic networks that I've looked at dispose of both a formal and an informal instrument of force. So let's take a look at the United States sending, the US government sending the National Guard and even the Marines to Los Angeles. That's called let's flex our muscles and see whether we really do control some of the formal instruments of force. What happens when you pardon militia members, members of the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers who stormed the capital of the United States of America? When you pardon and release them, you are founding the kernel of a loyal, informal instrument of force, straight out of the kleptocrat's handbook. I think the militias in Somalia are similar to that, and Guatemala, it goes without saying. Next one, you always see the justice sector, right? You have got to control the justice sector in order to, that's the deal with your followers in a kleptocratic network. You guarantee them impunity. We're seeing that in the United States today. You also get to guarantee punishment, to others who stand in your way, and that's Virginia. It's all of them, actually. In the United States, I would say the job is incomplete, but it's well underway. The January 6 pardons in this fair city of New York, Mayor Adams' case being dropped is another perfect example. Egypt was an interesting example, just to give a counterexample where President Sisi was actually not able to fully control the judiciary. So what he did was just start changing the jurisdiction so that he could route cases toward the military courts, which he could control. And it's why in Guatemala, Virginia's work is so crucial, and CICIG, the International Commission, was mentioned in that film. And that's really what allowed the type of courageous work that her team undertook to really take place, is because there had been the momentum created by a wonderful partnership between local justice sector professionals and international colleagues from a variety of different countries. And it was so successful and so this collaboration so admired in Central America that Honduras went on a massive strike, the Honduran people, to demand a Honduran equivalent, which got sputteringly off the ground, but by then it was clear how dangerous to kleptocratic networks such a commission was, and it was also dismantled like CICIG. And then I would say that there are a lot of other instruments of power that matter here, but the other really obvious one is any independent oversight organs, right? They have to be either co-opted so that they can be aimed at enemies instead of at the actual agencies or administrative structures that they're supposed to be focused on, or they have to simply be disabled. And again, in the United States, we have inspectors general who have been fired. We have independent agencies such as the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau being essentially dismantled. What about education? What about the role of precisely the press, like Abdullah Mu'min's work? They are a kind of independent oversight function, and they have to be attacked and disabled. Or associations, like Andrea's Sasufi Collective. So I think I'd like to draw this to a close with this reflection. Back when I was really in the trenches in these issues, a decade or so ago, when I was really involved in all of the discussions about them, we were talking a lot about fragile and failing states. And this was a very, key theme in international development. And you could call a place like Afghanistan, where I spent a lot of time, or Somalia, a classic fragile, failing state. And the argument then was, the state was fragile, and the failure of the state created gaps which allowed corruption to seep in. I argued the opposite. Kleptocrats turn their countries into failed states. The corruption is the cause. The state failure is the effect. And it is true in different ways of Congo-Brazzaville, of Somalia, of Guatemala, and that is what is happening in the United States. The Doge slash and burn was not a separate, or has not been a separate phenomenon that has been taking place parallel to the corrupt self-enrichment project of people in charge of the United States government at the moment. It is part of that project. The dismantling of the US government is part of the kleptocratic project. The state collapse, the collapse of a paradigm, and here's where I'm gonna flip the story on you. State collapse calls for imagination. It's a gigantic opportunity to get beyond the business as usual that I'm afraid we in the anti-corruption community have been a little bit satisfied with for too many years. And I would say in Andrea's film, it wasn't mentioned that he has actually stood for political office. And so I would say that working against corruption is not just about being a check on corrupt activities. It's about radical reimagining, and that's where we all need to be right now. What sort of culture and polity would we fashion together? With what incentive structures to favor and bring forth integrity in our public officials if we had to do it from the ground up? And that is what the opening to come will offer us. So I'd like to leave you tonight with the plea, let your imaginations take flight. The next round is for us. Thank you.